Hi, so I'm Rebecca Ableson, and I'm talking about the Progressive Era today. Um, the Progressive Era happened a little over 100 years ago, and it's a time that was basically meant for a lot of change in the early 20th century. It was just a time when there was a lot of things happening, and there was a lot of development going on, and a lot of different reasons for why things were happening, and a lot of effects from it. One thing that definitely caused a lot of progression is Ford and what he was doing when he created the Model T car, and he also created the assembly line, which basically meant that you could produce everything a lot faster. And because of this, they definitely needed a lot more factory workers. There's a lot more jobs to be had, and there was a lot more people that were making more money, and so there was a little bit of a difference between the upper class and the lower class, and now there was a new middle class just because of all these new factories that were opening up. But because of all of this, it definitely meant that there was a lot worse conditions in the factories and everything, and there was a lot more people working there, so a lot of it just, wasn't taken care of properly. And a lot of these industries became oligopolies. And so, like Standard Oil, which owned 85% of the oil industry at the time, were just taking complete control of all of these different industries, and there wasn't a lot of diversity with them. So a problem with that was there was a lot of arguments between businesses and whether or not there should be big businesses allowed and how long exactly they should be allowed to have control of everything for. A lot of people wanted to split them up and create smaller businesses in one main business, and a lot of other progressives were definitely still for the big businesses because they thought that it was helping. Another thing that kind of made this more of a progressive era was there was a lot more women and children workers, and you definitely saw more women graduating from high school and more women wanting to go to universities and pursue a degree and do something different with their life other than going and raising a family. And even if they had a family, a lot of women were refusing to give up their careers just because they were having kids. And because of this, all of them working, they definitely needed things that protected them more. And so with children in the Bureau of Labor, there was the Children's Unit Form, which protected like children's labor laws, and it definitely funded more maternity clinics during this time because more women were actually working, and it also actually helped promote things like birth control because a lot of women just didn't even want to have kids or wanted to maintain how many kids they wanted because they knew that they had to go back to work. And it also helped a lot more women fight for reform on all the different laws. And because of all these different people that were just talking and wanted to get their opinions out there, there was a lot of writers called muckrakers who also wanted to get their ideas out there to a bigger audience. A very famous muckraker was W.E.B. Du Bois, who was a sociologist. He was African American, and he inspired change for the African American community during the time. In 1903, he wrote The Souls of the Black, along with a lot of his other works, which kind of inspired reform for African Americans. And he just wanted justice and equality for everyone, whether it was his race or not his race. And he helped eventually run the NAACP, which is National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. And in it, he was kind of the voice of the organization when he wrote The Crisis, which is kind of what their paper was and how they kind of spread their word about everything. And also during this time, all of these people were coming together to create organized labor because there were so many of them. So there was all of these unions being formed because so many more people were actually working, and they were really just trying to have proper work conditions for everything. And so because there was a lot more workers because of all the immigrants coming in from all the different countries, all the people moving here, a lot of unions were formed during this time, and they were important because there were so many people working and so many people actually joining a union and having a reason to stand together that the bosses actually would listen to them, and they would form strikes and do things like that. And it actually helped out because they actually figured out compromises and actually created better work environments for themselves because they figured out how to come together as a whole. Today, I think it's very important to look back at the progressive era just because nowadays there's so many things that I think people from my generation look at as more progressive, and we don't really think of progressive as a negative word. We think of progressive as a positive word, and it means that we're going in the right direction for change. I think nowadays with a presidential candidate, they would kind of be looking at a way to have free education, not necessarily you don't ever have to pay anything for education, but maybe in a way that you don't have to pay for your education while you're there, and then eventually you'll help pay towards school loans for other students when they're in and you have a successful job in your career. Another thing that I think is very important is a lot of women's rights. Especially the past few days, there's been a lot of protests about women's rights and about abortion and birth control, and I think a new progressive candidate would definitely be all for listening to what a woman would want. And it's not about what a man thinks is okay for her, it's about what is actually acceptable and how you should actually treat a woman. And I think that this was something started in the progressive era when they were fighting for women's rights to vote, and I think it continues today when we're still fighting for how we should properly be treated and how we deserve as many rights as we can get and the exact same rights that anyone, no matter the color or gender or whatever, has. And I think like nowadays it's just important to remember that the progressives just want to move forward, and it was just an era of new ideas and new thinking, and I think that that's something that we need to still consider today. So thank you for listening. Sorry if my voice sucks. I have had the flu for 5 days, so thank you.